Go ahead and hand it over to Shadeja and Melissa to go ahead and do an overview on the legal part. Thank you, Ms. Yazzie, sister.
So I'll go over what the court ruled in this case, and then move on, give you a quick rundown of the timeline of the litigation, and then as Ms. Yazzie has pointed out, where we are at this point in the legal process. So with that, as she mentioned, and as you heard in the video, in 2018, the judge ruled in the plaintiff's favor and held that the state of New Mexico was violating students' constitutional right to a sufficient education. And the judge described what a sufficient education means for New Mexico students, and that is to be prepared for college and career and civic readiness. So that is what the court held, and as Ms. Yazzie pointed out, the court issued 600 pages of findings of all of the deficiencies in the state's public school system. Everything from just the academics to transportation to the lack of technology, so on and so forth. So it was a very comprehensive and really is why the Yazzie Martinez is so unique in terms of just the broad scope of the court's findings. And so we're very fortunate that at the time, Judge Singleton really understood what the plaintiffs were arguing for, and that's a sufficient education that is really centering the students at the heart of this case. And the case involves four particular student groups, and that's Native American students, students with disabilities, English language learners, and students who come from economically disadvantaged households. So what the court ordered at the time in 2018 was the state to provide solutions to improve the education system, and the court gave them a timeline. At the time, it was 2019. Well, that deadline came and went, and nothing had been accomplished in that short time frame. So why this continues to be an issue is because there's so many things that still needs to be addressed in the lawsuit. Everything from, again, looking at the multicultural framework that our school system has to be grounded in. The foundation should be culture, language, and accurate histories of our students. And again, our student body is so unique from students, say, back east, who may not have the same, core values or upbringing that our kids come to school with here in New Mexico. So culture and language was very important in this case in the ruling. Second is we need effective programs and services. So programs such as student supports to ensure that students are successful academically, whether that's tutoring, after school, before school support systems, as well as wraparound services, right? So we need kids to be ready to come to the classroom to learn. And so what that means is perhaps supports for the family, support for behavioral health, mental health support. The judge went on to talk about the importance of having a quality teacher workforce. We need an educated workforce that is trained in addressing the needs of these four particular student groups. And so that includes pre-service, in-service, professional development, those types of programs that would allow them to be effective in the classroom. Importantly is funding, right? So how do we have a public school system if there's insufficient resources to implement any good program for students? And so the judge honed in on the need for funding, and in fact made a point to say that lack of funding is not an excuse. So the state was put on the spot to determine how it was going to spend or where it was going to get the resources to spend on education. And to date, though, since the lawsuit, there's been a huge investment in the public school system, and that's great. However, that funding still needs to be targeted to the four student groups in the case. so, that continues to be an issue, as well as accountability. How do we hold school districts, how do we hold the state of New Mexico and the Public Education Department accountable? We are finding, and I'll touch on this a little bit more, is that the defendants in this case is the state of New Mexico. And so at that highest level, we need accountability within the Department of Education. This slide here gives you a nice visual of a case since 2018, well, before 2018, when the case was filed in 2014. You'll see that we've been in this fight for a long time, this fight for education equity, right? We fought off the state's motion to dismiss the case. The state said, you know, judge, leave it to us, trust us, we'll do better. Well, thankfully, the judge denied that request and said, no, I'm gonna keep jurisdiction over this case until I see that significant improvements have been made. In addition, during COVID and the pandemic, where, you know, our tribal communities really suffered immensely, the legal team with the lead of Ms. Yazzie quickly realized that students, especially in the rural and tribal areas, don't have access to Wi-Fi, to technology, right? They didn't have, so not all people had laptops and Chromebooks. So we filed a motion with the court, an emergency motion, and we argued the case and said sufficient education also means that students must have Wi-Fi, access to broadband, computers, all the tools necessary to be able to access online learning. And that, we were successful, the plaintiffs won that, and the state was put on the hook to find resources. And that project, or that issue, is still on the table and is being addressed by the legislature. In addition, we were able to get the support of the Attorney General, and the Attorney General is the head legal honcho, right? The attorney for the state, and the AG supported the plaintiffs and support the plaintiffs in this lawsuit and said we shouldn't have a lawsuit. This is something the state should be doing already because it's in our Constitution. That standard has to be met. So when we filed our joint motion of non-compliance in late September 2020, just last year, 2024, the AG didn't oppose our motion. The PED, however, did oppose the motion, and what we said in the motion, and this was a motion between, the Yazzie plaintiffs and the Martinez plaintiffs came together, filed this motion, and demonstrated with a ton of evidence to the court to say that there's so many things still left undone. The judge wanted a transformation of the education system, and it hasn't been done. And so through these years in the timeline, you'll see that we have been working to get status reports, to be deposed tons of state officials. We did all of this work to understand where the status was in this case. And at the end of that process, the legal team, the plaintiffs came together and said, no, we need to file another motion with the court. And then we went to a hearing in this past April of 2025. We argued our non-compliance motion. The judge agreed with the plaintiffs again and said, yes, the state continues to violate our students' constitutional rights, and ordered the state to develop a plan. And that's where we are now. The first deadline the judge gave the state was October 1st to submit a draft education plan, and they did that. As Ms. Yazzie pointed out, it was 70 pages and does not cover all of the deficiencies as laid out by the court in its 600 pages of findings. The next deadline, I'll just skip ahead, the next deadline for the case is coming up quickly, and that's November 3rd. November 3rd is the deadline for the defendants, the state, to produce a final plan to the court. And at that point, the plaintiffs, the legal teams for Martinez and Yazzie, we will look at the plan, and we're already looking at the draft plan that was provided to us. And then we have the ability in December to go back to court and file a motion with objections if we have any, and likely we will, as we've been hearing from the community, because aside from what the state did in their regional meetings, the Yazzie legal team, Ms. Yazzie and the legal team and the Center on Land Poverty have been doing these community input sessions, because we want to hear directly, right? The legal teams want to hear what you think. And what we're gonna do is take your input and put it in a nice package to the court to demonstrate, again, as evidence to demonstrate that the state still needs to do a lot more. So that's where we are in the process. And to give you a quick glimpse into what we're finding, very high level stuff right now, but we're digging into the details, and that is the Yazzie Martinez draft action plan is inadequate. It's not addressing everything we want to see in a plan. The plaintiffs, when we filed our non-compliance motion, and you'll see it in your handout on the back of the sheet, the 9 components that we're asking the state to address. And these key areas really came from all of you, from the previous time we went out to hear input from community. So we really, this came from the community. This came from plans, as mentioned, the Transform Education platform, as well as the Tribal Education Alliance, and our own community grassroots input that we got. This draft that was provided to us does not address all of these 9 components. In fact, it's very much vague and very much lacking in key elements, right? So it doesn't talk about, and it doesn't include any cost estimates. So that's an important component of a plan, right? We need specific action steps and measurable targets. Those are missing from the plan. It's only a 3-year plan when we were at the minimum asking for 5 years. But if you look at other lawsuits across the country, there's plans out there that span 10 years. And that seems reasonable to be able to plan forward, and that the legislature with the executive can plan how much investments can be made in education, where are the areas that need to be focused on, a long-term plan, right? It would help the state. And how else are we gonna move forward if we don't have a plan with measurable outcomes, targets, all of those key elements? So, a very high level, we are saying that the draft plan fails to meet the court order, the statutory requirements as found in laws like the Indian Education Act. And there's a lack of responsive systems, right? The plan is very disjointed, and it ignores years and years of community input. Like, this has been going on for even more than 7 years. There's a clear absence of coherent leadership from the Public Education Department and the executive branch. The key groups, tribal leaders, communities, educators, New Mexico faculty of color, students, and families are excluded from authentic decision-making in this plan. The plan does not address PED's lack of capacity and infrastructure to effectively support districts and schools, despite the Public Education Department being designated as the responsible party over 200 times in the plan. And yet the plan doesn't talk about how it's gonna build PED's capacity. The plan omits cost analyses and undermines transparency and prevents equity-based needs-driven decision-making. And lastly, it lacks short, medium, and long-term indicators grounded, again, in multicultural, multilingual, and place-based values. Those values that are important to the students here in Shiprock, to students across New Mexico, our diverse student body. There's no timeline, and the listed responsible parties is unrealistic and exclusionary, and the content in the action step table is not all aligned with the summaries of the community input provided, again, from our own community input sessions, and from what we heard, the PED and their comments, a lot of input was provided, and there's very little in the plan at this point. So I could go on and on, but just wanted to give you a sampling of some of those high-level findings that we have put out there already to the PED, and then we're hoping and looking forward to a more detailed and a better plan come November 3rd. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, Stasia. Ako di pendejo agi disjunct or the clay this evening discussion really coming from me as the plaintiff with my legal team to really get feedback from the community regarding this plan. Some of you may have not reviewed it yet. It's accessible through the PED website. But like I said, they only gave us till Friday to get community input. So you can do your input there, or you can either help us get that input. Up here we left some information, and then for those that want to just kind of jot down some of your input, we have a community feedback form as well to kind of give us some information that you've experienced or are dealing with in the school, in our school system. And this plan, for me, is the same system that's being used over and over. There's a part of me, drug ontological and sahaki, so you have to have this positivity on that going to the case on Jawafin. Ako ed on city case when, PED started this plan, hiring Lano Foundation and then also West Ed as to help them create this plan. So there was a part of me that was optimistic to think that, okay, I need with all the community input, community, as a parent and going through this for quite some time now, I think it's really time for us to stand up and make our voices heard, especially now at this time with everything going on. And then also to, we can no longer accept this kind of education for our students. It's been ongoing. I've experienced it. I'm sure many of you have experienced it too. My mother experienced it. And just going forward, I really encourage you to also help us stand up, use your voices, provide input, and that's where if you want to come, either come up or we can come to you to provide some of the input. And just maybe just even, your thoughts and comments, and also not the kid that if you guys have questions too, I know that some of us are early learning and understanding what this case is about. So we try to go out to communities to really educate people on what we're doing and why we're doing it. Just going back to that,
so I think we have at least a little over an hour to hear from you all. If you want to come up here and share what's on your mind and on your heart right now, in terms of what you've heard, if you have questions. But we have note takers, so we'll be capturing, your comments. And again, we'll use this as part of the legal team's package to the court.
So on the feedback form, there's a couple of questions that we put in there. What does fairness in the context of education mean to you? I know that many of us have experienced that unfairness in our education system growing up. And then also identifying the barriers. What barriers are you or your family currently experiencing in our education system? Also, do you believe that resources and opportunities are distributed fairly among all schools in the community? And then the solution, desired solution. how do we see our education for our students? What solution would you like to see implemented to ensure that equitable education for all students? Which of the following areas do you believe should be the top funding priority to increase educational equity? And I know there's many more. And then finally, any comments, ideas, concerns regarding equitable and sufficient education in our community? So yeah, so I just encourage you all to share with us any feedback. I don't know if some of our leaders had a chance to review the action plan draft. And I invite you also, if you want to say some words or and I know that this is a lot. It is a lot. There's so much that it involves, and it's been ongoing. You know, we're at this point now, and the way I feel about it, from my point, is that it's critical now to, use our voices. There was an analogy made yesterday from one of our other leaders, is that he used the analogy of a football game. We're right here by the goal line. I'm not a big football fan. By the goal line, and we have the ball. Let's not drop the ball for our students, for our children. Let's push it through. And that was the analogy that was used. We're so close that we have this opportunity to transform our education the way we want it, the way we want our children taught, to implement their culture, their language, to get, especially with our children, the Hasaniki that are in the special education program. Though I know those are the children that are always left behind and pushed out. On the resources that our children endure here in our rural areas with transportation, housing, food, mental wellness, behavioral, I'm thinking about a lot of other things. Our curriculum, what type of curriculum our children should be taught, the workforce, our teacher, and then also technology, and then family support services like AHIDA, and just strengthening the capacity of the PED. So yeah, we just want to open the floor out for anybody that wants to make a comment, has questions, or any ideas. We have the form as well if you decide to rather fill out the form.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Shadeja. Shay Amber, Kinas Makrati, Ireshio Tohatso, then Kian, Esther, my people versus team, Destiny, Desachino, I wish people to appreciate the time and the energy. So I'm looking at digital page 13 of 75 of the plan, and I'm wondering, because I'm also a visual learner, since we're using all of our different methods, could the team that's broadcasting, could they actually put on the action plan? Because I'd like to, while I ask questions, I'd like to visually see it, because I'm gonna have it on my screen. What I wanted to do is get an idea in sense of, so the 3-year action plan starts with goal 1.1, and so what we're looking at here is, so if the responsible party is PED for year 1, immediate actions through June 30th, 2026, can you help me understand if what has changed in PED, where they would be leading that discussion and providing technical assistance and professional development? It says right here, utilizing pedagogical strategies aligned with a lot of, so there's a lot of acronyms here that I'm not, is HQIM, high quality, what?
Instructional material.
Instructional material to ensure, what's CLRI?
Culturally linguistic relevant instruction.
Okay, so that's something that we would need
Lot
to
of
break down
acronyms.
to,
Yeah.
help in terms of what you've experienced and what the case and what the judge has said. Instead of just saying PED would be responsible, my requested feedback would be is how are they going to do that? What resources are they gonna bring in to change their mentality? Because what has worked in the past does not work now. And that's why we're here, and we need PED to be responsible and accountable to say, okay, what mechanisms in working with the parents, with the different community groups, with the tribal nations to make sure that that's actually happening. So who is the accountability and then who's monitoring how these are being implemented? So I wanted to start there with year one because it's PED. Since we have representatives of the state legislature, year two does say pass legislation to require districts and charter schools to purchase HQIM. And so help me understand, because what we also see is consultants will be onboarded and then they profit, like I call them poverty pimps. They profit off of creating specific curriculum that everybody has to invest in, but it's not meeting the needs of our students. And so I would ask, those critical questions to be asked at the legislator and at Navajo Nation, our Department of Education, however they're involved, the different school boards and charters, is what does that look like? If we could start giving examples, like this is what we want to be in corporate. Now you tell me how you're gonna implement, you tell me how it's gonna be funded, and then we'll continue to monitor you. So that would be some feedback for at least goal 1 of 1. And then year 3, we go back to PED. So they're gonna be monitoring their own documents. And so I see a conflict there when you have an entity that has this systemic history of not providing adequate services to our students, then monitoring themselves. I would want to expand that to say, if we have to wait to year 3 to start monitoring, which is strange, anybody who implements any kind of plan, you start monitoring maybe even as early as like 3rd month, because you want to be able to be flexible and nimble to make changes. So I think that monitoring should be an independent entity that includes the community and community knowledge holders. So it's a diversified group where it's not just people, bureaucrats, checking a mark. They could say it works great because it's their program and in year 1 they develop. And so I think that's what I wanted to give feedback in terms of goal 1.1 at this time. And let's see. Right, so there's some other breakdowns, but I think that's where I see this trend where PED is responsible. So I would want to see how they're developing that, because this is still very vague in my opinion, because I would have to know how can we make sure this is what our students need to meet what we consider a success for our Navajo Native students across the state. So thank you for the time, and look forward to working with all of the subject matter experts here who have shown up, so that at least for the Navajo Nation, through the council as a governing body, we can set the tone from the top, and then we can make sure that all of the other programs that are set up to provide services to our children are then advocating. What I've seen, because I'm the chair of the New Mexico caucus, what I've seen is they'll get like a random or one Navajo who will agree, and then I've seen it myself, and then they will advocate for what's not in the best interest of our children. And I've heard New Mexico legislators to my face say, my face say, the problem we have is the amount of Navajo children that are in New Mexico schools. State legislators who represent Navajo communities. And so to this day, I will never support their initiatives because it's not in the best interest collectively for our people. We have 25,000 plus Navajo students in the state system, and that is why we need this holistic plan to meet their needs and not specific individual communities and leave out others, because then we're just perpetuating what this system did, where making sure that others can be successful at the harming those who don't have that equitable challenge. So it's a blessing to have those children. It's a blessing for us to be here, and it should never be a negative, or no one should look at our children in a negative way, but that could be the opportunity to change the whole dynamic of the school system here, at least in New Mexico, and then that could ripple out. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
That was Lenti, Representative Lenti. Yeah, I almost scratched his elbow.
Good morning, or good evening. Yazzie, She Andy Nanzin Shak, okay, English, Middle Twitchy, Bashi, Kachi, Bashi, Kashi, another play South Solo, Anna Koshiko, Seti, Yasi, Hata, Hojini, Chishiki, the Beach Batas, and Haseta, the English, and Giliki. Ako tragen sind Kibi Kakibi South Solo, Yache, 20 Bank, Ako, I am Martinez. I currently sit on the 25th Nomination Council. I'm going to face you guys for a bit as I introduce myself. I work with 4 communities, that is Fort Defiance, Summit, Crystal, and Red Lake. And the interesting thing about the region that I humbly serve is that we both in the state of New Mexico and the state of Arizona. And so it's double the duty, but I enjoy it very much. So I also sit on the Health, Education, and Human Services Committee. I am a member of that committee, and there's 6 of us who sit on that committee. So a few things that I want to acknowledge as I continue to deconstruct this My Action Plan. First of all, I think that this plan, how significantly impactful it should not have been developed within just a few weeks. We are talking about the longevity of our students across the board. And when this was issued by the coroner in April, you had 7 months to complete a task that they deemed was successful in 4 weeks, only to allow input through a survey in 2 weeks. And I don't understand how that is logical for the great state of New Mexico to be able to say that that is equitable, that is fair. We have, we may not have all the answers, but that's kind of the intent here. And when I received the community input hearings, the first thing I noticed was nowhere in their 15 community hearings was Navajo Nation. No communities on the Navajo Nation. Yes, we are within almost probably every community in the state of New Mexico. But the plaintiff is a Yazzie. You have to come to the Navajo Nation. And it had failed to do that. It could have been Tehachapi, it could have been here in Shiprock, it could have been in Navajo, New Mexico, it could have been in Crown Point, Orion. Joy Aja Lan Hachen Ajin Data, Ara Maje and Liniki at Shea and Nalda, A Ara Lan would with many of our Navajo students who are attenders. And so when I was selecting, I'm like, okay, where am I going to go? Where are they coming to Navajo? And I'm like, okay, they're not coming to Navajo. So I attended the one in Farmington, and that was on August 5th. And The way it was also handled, and if I offend anyone, sorry, but it was like a lunchroom in there. There was really no structure to determine such a serious matter on behalf of our students. And I seriously felt like I walked in, and I'm a former kindergarten through fifth grade teacher. I know how a lunchroom sounds with so many excited students. And it's just noisy, it's great to hear students laugh and talk, and that's just how it was. And it wasn't an environment to where we could truly focus on what mattered on behalf of our students, our Native students, our students with disabilities, our ELL students, and our disadvantaged students who are unfortunate in those circumstances. And there was really no guide to that. And there was a few students there, which I appreciate. And later on, a few weeks later, I reached out to New Mexico PED and I asked them, I said, how do I get you to come on Navajo Nation? And the response that I got at the time was, we wrapped up all our public meetings, so you have to wait until October 1st when the plan comes out, the draft plan. And I'm like, how do you do that? That's not okay, because again, in the state of New Mexico, there's over 27,000 Navajo students. And in their My Action Plan, they indicated that 1,000 of their 1,000 participants in 1,200. That's way below the total population of a lot of our school districts here. GMCSD, CCSD, Aztec Municipal, Bloomfield, with the exception of Cuba and Magdalena, APS, everybody. I don't understand how we do it. And I think one of my recommendations is to challenge New Mexico PED. How is that okay? The other challenging questions I have on here is, what is then the update and the cross-reference that supports this My Action Plan that is before us? And what I mean by that is because the state of New Mexico initiated equity councils, tomorrow's G2G, they have a session on how do you define tribal consultation. The state of New Mexico, you should know already what constitutes tribal consultation. You don't need a session to determine defining tribal consultation. And as a state legislator, that is our challenge with Navajo Nation. I always say it's not difficult to get a hold of Navajo. We're right down the street or we're right down the hallway. So oftentimes what we get is we try to reach out. We're everywhere. You call up Navajo and they'll call us. They'll know somebody. That's how easy it is to get a hold of Navajo. So I don't understand that interpretation. Which, by the way, that's tomorrow GT. So I think that's another challenging question that needs to be posed to New Mexico PED, is how are you still trying to define tribal consultation when the enactment of the New Mexico Indian Education Act is like a little over 20 years old. And the advancement of education over time, that's still an inquiry that apparently they're confused about. Teaching the Nepazad as well. I taught within the Gallup-McKinley County School District, and I was given 15 minutes to teach our language. 15 minutes is not enough time. That's another challenging question that needs to be posed is, since 2014, since the court ruling in 2018, and then what came out of April, what is then the difference that the state of New Mexico has done? And it's not always throwing money at the solution. That's always not the case in many times. And that's what we as legislators have encountered with the state of New Mexico, with the governor herself and others. That's not going to solve anyone's issues. Yes, it's helpful, it's resourceful, but you can't just give everything. And keep in mind, the state of New Mexico came out of an equalized status for their Title VII funds, which the great state of New Mexico held on for years and years, that our students, our Native American students, give to the state. But they didn't even invest that back to our local educational agencies. It took a lawsuit for them to realize that your students, your grandkids, that populates funds for CCSD and others, was actually had to go back to them. And New Mexico was one of 3 states, of all 50 states, that was in that position, but that was overruled, so that's good news, but we want to make sure it goes and it is spent wisely. Also, I also want to note that in here, we talk about the federal challenges as well. We recently learned that, through the government shutdown, that there are hindrances towards our students with disabilities. And we have a lot of our IEP students, we have a lot of ALL students, but there was no contingency plan that the state of New Mexico has initiated to support that. And that is also I'll say failure, but it's also on me as a legislator as well, for our tribe as well. Like, we also need to be able to make sure that we also are always like a step ahead. But that's something that I think is also important when talking about this. The other thing that this plan talks about is charter schools and public schools. I don't know if the state of New Mexico and PED knows that there are challenges between public schools and charter schools within one community. And I can give you several of those examples. GMCSD and 6 Directions, CCSD and Dream Connect. We've heard challenges before. So everyone's not really holding hands according to your plan. You have to realize that. And failure to realize that is because you didn't come to learn the communities. And I've been working with some of our local charter schools because they need transportation and school districts refuse to provide them transportation. In my position, I don't believe in boundaries, I don't believe in jurisdiction. I get it, they exist, right? But our families and our students are mobile. And I get why some LEAs want your students, because they come with this. But our end goal should be to be able to increase their knowledge, to give them some skills, to ensure that they're safe. And I think that's an important thing that should be acknowledged, but is not acknowledged in this My Action Plan. The other thing, when I participated in the August 5th event here, I asked, how much of a certainty are you going to ensure that school districts carry out what you guys are planning here? And the response that I got, PED can't really tell districts what to do. Okay, well maybe that's why it took you 4 weeks to develop this plan. You can't, we need the support from each level within each stakeholder to make sure that school districts are following some of those protocols. Even if you can't enforce it, you have to acknowledge or encourage it. Because I had to deal with a principal within our school district, within my constituency, who was unfairly treating our students, locking them in during recess time, and not allowing them to be kids. You can't do that. You're a guest in our community. We grew up here. We are from this community. And that's something that I feel is important to acknowledge. And that goes into my next recommendation, is that through this My Action Plan, it doesn't allow for flexibility. Shiprock, CCSD, is different than Cuba Independent Schools, is different from Magdalena Municipal Schools, is different from Galvin County School, is different from Los Alamos Public Schools. This plan is not a one-size-fits-all. You have to allow for flexibility for us to, and our educators and our students, to learn in an environment that is theirs. Something that you provide as structure and that you feel, and that I feel like that's what this plan is enacting, is that it's gonna produce similar results. But it's not going to if it's a one-size-fits-all. You have to allow school districts, other LEAs, charters, to be able to be a little more flexible with our students. Because our students who attend school at Clovis or Hobbs or APS, they don't come back to the good old res roads we have, they don't come back to grandma and grandpa's house. I mean, I'm sure they yearn to, But I know families, they opt to live in these urban spaces, which is at their discretion, they can do. But that's the type of imbalance that you can't expect to be similar in nature. It's just not gonna happen. And I think as teachers, for myself, I had to mobilize myself within my students because everyone didn't learn the same. Some of our students learn more illustratively, they learn more one-on-one, and so I had to navigate different personalities. In the state of New Mexico, PED also needs to do the same thing and acknowledge that. Because diversity is a wonderful thing, but you have to be able to establish a plan that allows for those complexities. And the other thing that I also want to mention is that our Native American students do make up about 10% of the New Mexico public schools. And when we talk about our PTNs, Pueblo Tribes and Nations, that it is also important to understand the population and proportion. And this goes back to the state legislators as well, is the expectation for the Navajo Nation is not the same as Esleda. It's not the same as Laguna. With all due respect to our Pueblo Tribes and Nations, our Department of Education have to travel sometimes a whole day to provide technical assistance to schools like Bloomfield, Aztec, Cuba. We can't just go down the street. So those also needs to take into consideration, and I think that this proposed plan fails to acknowledge those types of data. And again, the beauty of our native culture, our language, can be integrated in a lot of what they feel and maybe they don't feel when we talk about literacy, when we talk about math, when we talk about science. And that's something that I stepped away from when I was teaching. I'm like, the school district was wanting me to teach like camel to our students, and I'm like, I don't know, I've never seen a camel in Navajo or out towards Crown Point. Like, I'm not gonna teach you about camel, sorry. I'm gonna teach you actually about this. And so I would have to find that fine line. So those expectations also need to be acknowledged here. So I don't know the state of, based on your timeline, about how maybe you're going to object. And that's something that I would encourage, is to go back out and truly get the representation, the data from all our stakeholders, including our students. I am on a mission to amend our own Title 10 Navajo Nation Code on Education, and I have to remind myself all the time, you have to get student input. I don't know everything, but they have a thing or two to teach us as well, and I think that's great, because technology is advancing, AI is advancing, educational thought theory is advancing, so those are things that we need to also keep in mind. So there's a lot more. I continue to read, I continue to see how we can also support, because I think with Honorable Crotty and all our team members to be able to submit something by the 17th as well. So if anything additional comes up, I will definitely acknowledge it and maybe just send it over for some thought, but it's also something that we've also recognized and hopefully submit to by Friday. So thank you very much everyone for listening to me. Sorry my back is towards you, but thank you all as well for being here and championing this on behalf of our students, all students.
Ayan, so na naisot kanito kodong situation siya ay Barbara Morgan na siya dito nakakapay na siya tuloy dito siya kapahan siya na siya. So I am part of Zodi and Amos. Kinahani, you come from the pueblo there east of Crown Point. If we have Pueblo clans, we're related to the Pueblos. And now all started when we got here. Helped to build Chaco Canyon. We have our own stories about that place, and archaeologists will differ, but we know the truth, right? I started teaching I taught painting at Maine Farms. Went into college, was there back in 1969, 70. And then I started taught at Rama, taught art for 4 years. And then moved on up, did policy analysis for Peter McDonald. I also worked as a staff assistant for Pete Zahn. But mainly I was teaching all those years. I taught with my sister over here, Sandy, who hasn't been introduced, Sandy Flynn. She's a big part of my life. She pushed me forward. She helped me realize my capabilities when I taught at her school. I want to thank you for filing that lawsuit because it brings to the fore. Thank you for being our legal counsel. You sound very wonderful, strong people, and I think we should support them. My comments are going to be about how we should teach people who come here about who we are, where we come from. We come from, we started organizing as a tribe east of here, about maybe past Aztec, up at Dinetla. We started organizing, and the people who helped us were the Jemez. We have Pueblitos still up there. You can visit go to YouTube and put in Dinetla defensive sites, and it'll give you a tour. But a lot of people don't know this, even Navajo people who live here don't know about the Netla and how we organized as a tribe and how we were connected to the different tribes, how we traded with them. We traded people. Just kidding. We either saved them or we kidnapped them because we knew that we just had one blood. We'd be walking around like this. So we had to have other people's blood. Zuni, Amos, Isla, Ogen, Zia, Nashashi from San Ildefonso. And so those clans identify our past and who we are. I also taught at Alamo, not Alamo, but Magdalena. I found that the most students who spoke Navajo were from Alamo. Perfect Navajo. Yes, they have their own dialect. But as a Navajo teacher, you don't try to change their dialect. Tell them they're wrong. You learn that dialect so you know it as you go around the Navajo Nation. I taught at the juvenile correctional facility in Tuba City and met some young people who were in prison. And so I had junior high and high school students. I've also taught FBI and U.S. attorneys about cultural sensitivity on how to treat victims and survivors of violent crime when I work for the police department. So there are many jobs that I've had, but teaching was where I belonged. And so I want to just talk a little bit about Title 10 and how the council had changed it to really state some strong Navajo values. That Title 10 is educational in our code. It is the educational code. I helped to write the standards for Navajo Nation history, government, language, and culture. But when I go to the schools, I'm a consultant, they aren't using them. So I'm wondering, why not? We had memorandums of agreement with the state of New Mexico about Navajo language and culture in the schools, and yet we never saw it. There's very, very few schools that we went to where it was being properly used to teach the students about our culture and the language and our history and our government. And I included that geography because we were in a large area before the U.S. Army started taking us to Kuwait. My biggest fear is that they're going to come back because of what they're doing to other people. They don't want any more brown people in this nation, the United States of America. If they come for us, I'm going to fight. I'm not going to sit back. And that's what I think everybody should be reminded of now. So, in regards to the monies for what we're talking about tonight, a while back we were bragging about having $1 billion in excess in our state government budget. And they didn't even mention education. They just went on and on about oil revenues and blah, blah, blah. Now, Lujan Grisham is leaving, and I hope that if we have to put anyone in there who really sees us for what we are, to put Deborah Holland in as governor of New Mexico. She's native. She lived here in Shiprock at one time. Her mom worked here, and she knows us. The other gubernatorial candidates don't know us. And that's all I have to say. Yeah, that's all.
Yazzie, Shane, Kings, Nisha, Tanazani Michelin, Tanazani Michelin, Turichi Bashishin, Nakaidane, Edashiche, Aldo, Vizaplan National. So, super grateful to be here in company with all of you and all of the people who want to be change makers here in our community. So I want to start off by saying, I come to you today as a previous student from this community. I attended the Martinez Elementary, Mesa, Southwood Middle School, and graduated right next door from Shiprock High School. From there, I attended university at Susquehanna University in Stone Grove, Pennsylvania, and now have returned as an educator. So it's really good to be back. But I'm here mostly today to talk about my experience in education. This will be my 4th year as an educator, and in the short 4 years that I have been in education, it's been really hard. So in the 4 years that I've worked here, I have been fired twice and have worked in 3 different schools. The first 2 of those schools was actually public school, and I'm now working for the BIE school here in Shiprock. I have faced retaliation and removal from the students that I have grown to love and, of course, made really strong connections with here. Being as somebody who lives in the community, it was really easy for me to come into a classroom, connect, and also share the knowledge that I have developed over my short life. I have been accused of inappropriate conduct with colleagues, which was unfounded. I have gone through the chain of command, starting with grievances, filed Title IX reports, have done interviews, and tried to have my case heard. Going so far as to doing a Human Rights Bureau complaint. However, every step of the way, I was promised that we're going to resolve this shouldn't have happened to you, only for that not to be true. And so after proving myself as being in a protected class, and having faced this treatment from my administrators, I did everything I could to advocate for myself and was only met with the last part of, well, this is unfounded, you have no probable cause. Apparently I wasn't treated any differently than any other other person, even though all I really needed was an extension to finish my licensure program. And because of everything that I was accused of and all the advocacy that I did for myself, I was once revered as a teacher who was effective and great for the students in my community, and then told that I was a liar and that I was untruthful to my employer about my progress in the teacher program, which was completely untrue. I've been very honest every step of the way and had their support up until I started to advocate for myself. And in doing all this, I've learned the hard work that it takes to prove my case to somebody, and so I really appreciate you, again, putting all those 600 pages together or being a part of making that happen, because I know how hard it is and how emotionally traumatizing it can be, especially as somebody who's had to tell their story multiple times. So after facing retaliation, being removed from my school, and being told I could reapply, I was forced outside of my community, having to take jobs elsewhere. And then I finally made my way back, only to be not in public education, or not in public school facility, but with BIE. And so all of these changes along the way, I've been trying to find a healthy work environment where I can thrive and continue to support my students and provide them with that cultural linguistic education that they all need. So when I come across previous students from places I've worked, just like last night when I attended the volleyball game here, I was met with students who said, "Ms. Keens, I really wish you were here. I miss you a lot. You're my favorite teacher." And I wish that they knew that I did everything in my power to try and stay at those schools. However, I was not protected by the systems that are in place, and let alone by the admin in my building who once heavily relied on me and other colleagues to do amazing work in the community. Again, I wish they knew that it was never my choice to leave them, and instead I was displaced by the systems that denied them a quality educator. Again, having come from the same background, same culture, and the same community in which they never grew up in. I was promised homegrown and very quickly turned against, despite my students' needs in our communities for an educator like myself. So I propose, or at least would like the state to take action in holding these qualities of effective educators also to those in administration. Because not only do we as educators have to hold this high standard and meet all of these important criteria, we also need to have admin that are fair and unbiased and also effective in their roles, so teachers like me can continue to do their jobs and not be displaced. I also propose that they protect quality educators, especially those from diverse backgrounds and protected classes, as that was not my case in the processes that I've mentioned before. I think it is really important that not only do they establish a plan to protect those who are diverse in our community, but to make sure that those internal investigations change to third party, as like I said, with all of the other processes that I have done, all of their investigation was done internally, and of course, that comes with bias. And for someone like me, has unfair outcomes since I don't have the resources to get legal representation in matters like this. There's a lot more that I could say about this because it was honestly a really rough last couple of years. But if there's time, or if you guys are interested, I will be mingling here for a while, and maybe we can talk more then. But that's just a little bit about my experience being an educator here in my hometown.
Yazzie, Virginia, KBR, Michigan, Monsanto, I'm from here, Shiprock, and like Cheyenne, I went to all the schools here in Chicago. And I had a different major in college, and then out of nowhere, I wanted to become a teacher. Came back, I lived in Europe for a while, came back here. I'm a level 3 teacher at Tucson Doors, and my master's thesis is laying a path for monster slayers, and it's based on fostering self-efficacy among Martinez students, and that's something that I really pride myself in. So the way I look at it, it's a live document that is constantly being updated, throughout my teaching. And I've experienced what I believe to be discrimination, retaliation, and inequitable treatment by the school district. And it was a serious and unfounded allegation of me that was made at work that deeply affected my professional reputation and overall my well-being.
Take a breath. We're here with you.
Inflicted by my administrators, which dismantled my ability to fully actively serve our students and contribute meaningfully. Since February 2024, prior to that, I left my job. I went to work, wanting to create agents of change with my students and advocate. And like she said, I didn't want to leave. I did everything in my power to stay. 467 pages later, I was forcibly moved. I was fired from my coaching job. Things I initiated at my home school, like the National Junior Honor Society, English Expo, all those things are taken away from me slowly, legally. It was all considered isolated incidences when I tried to file grievance after grievance. Human Rights Bureau and Title IX complaint. Again, how do I fight the school district that has 3 lawyers? Where do you go? How? Where do you run? Where do you try to get resources? When all you're met with, it'll be okay, all these save face remarks. And I think the biggest thing that hurt me the most was I had no access to my students. Things that I created, like plays that we had here, shadow play, were being canceled legally. And the only being reinstated because parents complained. And to tell you the truth, I wanted to leave. I wanted to go to a safer place, to leave my community, where I came back to help my students. They go through so much adversity, won't even believe, or some of you guys do understand. And to carry that burden of proof by yourself, staying up at night, like I said, 467 pages later, trying to prove yourself over and over, trying to look in direction where who's going to believe me. And people wanting to write statements, but they're afraid of retaliation because they've seen exactly what I went through. And I feel like the system is designed to protect institutions and that are equipped with legal teams, and they have funding, they have political protection. Like I said, I was isolated from my colleagues. allowed to participate in PLC. My prep was taken away. Like I said, all these little things that administrators can do to make you feel alone. And you try your best to file agreements, and after a while you're just like, I just sound like this. I'm gonna sound like a crybaby and tattletale after a while. How do you endure it? And what's crazy is this administrator has there's so much backlog, and so many different people have been affected, displaced, fired, and when I try to advocate, even the people that help me said this person is a person who is good at professionally documenting people out of their jobs. And I told myself when I first went into this, I'm okay, I'm smart, I'm a hard worker, but as things were stripped away from me, that brought me purpose that I loved. And now I'm trying to find a home between 3 different schools, trying to find trust has been really hard. And I know, and I am a very smart person, and I am a very good teacher. Thank you for, another thing that I would hope that is action plan, like Cheyenne said, that there's a third party that could come in and do an investigation, someone that's outside, and some kind of legal aid for teachers. You know, I tried to look into it, it's like $300 to $500 an hour for a lawyer. I can't afford that. And it's honestly brought so much trauma to me. My hair falling out, and my nails don't even grow anymore. But I try to look on the good side. You know, there's a lot of people like, hang in there, you'll be okay. How can I hang in there when you can't write a statement for me? Because they're afraid. They know that they're retaliated against. So thank you for hearing what I have to say.
First of all, thank you for the last 2 women that stepped up and shared your honesty and your lived experience. I'm sure all of us have faced something like that, and so thank you for having the courage to do so. Good evening, everyone. Hiyo, how Yazzie. My name is Savitri Payochi. I'm Taspaplo and Oglala Lakota, married to my Navajo husband. I have 4 wonderful children, 2 of which have IEPs, one on the gifted side and one on the developmental delay side. I have been an advocate for about a decade, supporting my son Cash, who is a gifted student through Bloomfield Schools. And like the previous women's experience, I've faced the same retaliation that continues to follow me to this day. I put myself through school as a non-traditional student and went to Native American, UNM in Native American Studies, and graduated magna cum laude. And I say that not to brag, but to say how amazing this curriculum is and how powerful it is, and it changes the trajectory of somebody's life when they know what their history is and what their customs, values, and everything like that is reflected in the curriculum. It gives me the courage to stand in front of boards of education and people that don't want to hear what you have to say. So thank you to UNN and the team there, Dr. Martinez, who, when I was done with my bachelor's degree, went out in the community to use it and faced some horrendous stories that I don't want to share right now, but was able to go back to UNN and feel welcomed into the Native American Teacher Preparation Program, and which is fast and furious. And I know that we have to put programs in place so that we can have teachers in classrooms that look like us, but those fast and furious curriculums are hard. It's hard to only earn $30,000, go to school full-time, and work full-time. It's basically setting you up to fail because you're not able to experience the full experience that you need to become a first-year teacher. So my student teaching experience was horrendous. I was able to find one mentor teacher who spoke about my own tribe funerary processes, and they were incorrect. And so I didn't have the ability to correct him because he was responsible for saying if I passed or if I didn't pass this program. So you're not able to critique your own student teacher. I know that there's research programs in place that say, when you first start as a student teacher, you're going to probably not agree with your mentee's teaching practices. And so thank goodness I was able to read those and be like, okay, I know my tribe's funerary practices and what he was saying was incorrect. So there are spaces that need to be changed where you can feel safe and comfortable in a classroom learning how to be a teacher. And eventually, later on, he was terminated. So, and not by my grievance, but by another parent's grievance. So I am here as a representative for Quintil Residential Campus, which is a tribally controlled dormitory in Aztec, New Mexico. We have 108 amazing Native American students attending our dorm. And if you can imagine about 54 males and 54 females on each side of the dorm, you can imagine what the 28 employees have to do to make sure that these students have access to a sufficient education, which includes behavior management, wraparound services, communication with the district that they go to, Aztec. It's not an easy job. And so one of the main priorities that we face is funding. We are a tribally controlled school, and so we are funded by the Indian School Equalization Program, which gives us about $7,700 per student, compared to public schools, which receive about $16,000 to sufficiently operate. So that forces us to spend significant amounts of time writing grants to fund the services that we need. So there's that. So if we can get our future governor, Deb Haaland, to give us sufficient education, that would be one thing that would solve that problem. The other thing is, I heard another person say about school boards. So in Aztec, New Mexico, our school board does not have a Native American person that represents the 30% of the Native American students that attend the school. And so even having a Facebook post on Indigenous Peoples Day will not happen unless you're the one poking the bear. And I'm the one poking the bear. So we did get a Facebook post to recognize the 19 different tribes that are represented in our district after business hours. So I feel like we have one Native American coordinator that serves K through 12. And I would say that's roughly about the whole district district is about 700 students, so 30%-ish. We need more staff that is dedicated to serving all these students. According to the PED graduation rate, I think it was 2024, 2025, our graduation rate was 65%. If that is not a call to action, I don't know what is. What else you can do to say, we need help, we need resources, we need people that are passionately pissed off and motivated to correct these inefficiencies. I am, as I said, a licensed teacher, so I have the parent perspective of advocating for my son who was gifted and they didn't want to test him because they didn't have 20 people to test giftedness. And so I also have the teacher perspective. So I know what it feels like to have PD directed at you weekly, if not daily. Multi-level systems of support, like us having to come up with lesson plans on the spot to be able to teach students that have math deficiencies or reading deficiencies, letters training, ongoing PD, other things that you have to micro-credentialing, master's degrees, doctorate degrees, so that you can level up from level 1 to level 2, level 2 to level 3. And so I have that understanding, which is also another way to set up teachers to fail. We don't have time to teach, basically. So we need to figure out a way to, and I'm 100% on professional development, but we need to figure out a way to not do it in 1 hour every day and then expect the teachers to teach and test weekly so that we can measure progress. I mean, it's just not working. We do need targeted supports. So, for instance, at our campus in Kintill, we have 108 students. About 20 of them are probably in sports, and we're follow 25 CFR, so we're required to have 1 hour of tutoring. Unless they are failing, then they have 2 hours of tutoring. So they don't have, we don't have the infrastructure to support that many students, so we use our cafeteria. So imagine being in a cafeteria where they just had dinner at 5 o'clock and our amazing food service workers are in there cleaning the kitchen, sweeping the floor, mopping the floor, banging pots around, cleaning dishes, and right there are about 60 to 70 students trying to study. We don't have the infrastructure or the manpower. We have 3 tutors to help these students. And so, just to give you an academic snapshot, a few weeks ago, we checked grades and we had 13 straight A's. So yay! But what about the others? How are we targeting those support services to them? Not only during that 1 hour of study hall, but in other places. How are we supporting them when somebody dies in their family? How are we supporting them when they're affected by drugs, alcohol, fentanyl, and all the things in life? We have one social worker who is with us tonight, Martinez, and I love that she's here with passion to support our students. Also, Brandon John, our academic coordinator, who's here, who manages all the academic things. That's 3 people managing 108 students. So yes, we do need more support. As far as like tech support, data analysts. I know Bernalillo Public Schools is doing something. I just came back from NIEA and they had to hire a software company to manage the Power School because this guy with a PhD told us Power School is trash. And so they have to come up with this whole other system to analyze Power School's data so that they can provide data to the tribally education departments because the tribes want to know how their kids are doing when they're going to public hire this company to analyze this data. So we don't have that company, unfortunately, so we have to analyze this data ourselves and manage the students at the same time. And I want to, communication. So communication is tough, especially when you have parents that may or may not have been affected by boarding school. So parenting, I feel like we need more resources to engage parent or to have parent engagement, to understand those parenting styles. You know, sometimes they're meaner because maybe they have been abused as a boarding school student, and that's the way they were raised, and that's the way they taught their kids. So I feel like some more resources to bring awareness to the boarding school effects and how it's affecting us today. So if you're here and you don't speak Navajo, you don't speak your own language, you're affected by boarding school, I feel like. Two more things. I talked about time. The fire hose of P, I talked about that, boarding school. And I think that's all I have to say for now, but I just want to thank you very much for all the time, commitment that you are putting into this effort. We got your back.
I'm going to stand to the side, more culturally appropriate for me. My name is Milton Bluehouse Jr. I come from Granada, Arizona, and I'm an associate professor at the Nate College, and I teach economic development, project management, leadership, business management, etc. And so I want to first acknowledge the trauma that our relatives have experienced here in their educational careers. We wanted to send our healing energy to them, and that they will return back to this path of cornhole, Jackass-Chi, that you'll become healed in the process. And so I want to build off of that conversation to say that we advocate for PED to implement programs for educational systems outside of the state or outside of tribal reservations, in addition to those on reservations. And a part of our advocacy is that we would hope that educational leadership, educational administrative leadership, and boards would implement elements of the mandates for culturally appropriate education, responsive educational activities to correct the educational attainment data that clearly reflects that there's a failure in the system. And I think that as I listen to our relatives share their traumatic experiences here, I keep thinking about an idea that a component of a plan, and this may very well be a part of these community conversations, should include PED oversight of educational, administrative leadership and boards to the end result of ensuring that circumstances such as our relatives have experienced are adequately addressed, and that their rights are acknowledged, and that the legal and administrative processes are adequately undertaken to address the concerns, the trauma, the injustices that our relatives have experienced here as well, in a manner that ensures our teachers are protected, that our teachers have the adequate resources necessary to do their jobs, and that there would be a a process by which administrators and boards do not sweep issues under the carpet, that they are held accountable. And I think that that might be the component for a plan that would acknowledge PED's oversight authority over educational administrative leadership and boards to ensure that teachers are protected and taken care of. I think that that's how I understand a way to proactively implement how the plan may protect teachers in our communities who have experienced some traumatic and maybe injustices by administrative boards. And so that being said then, I wanted to move on into another conversation to say that I want the record to reflect my outrage and disappointment at PED. The Santa Fe New Mexican in September 30th, and then a follow-up to their article on the 14th, reported that PED had sat on multiple plans in a time frame in which they were communicating to my relative, I guess she would be my grandmother, Olmenia by clan, and to the Center for Law and Poverty and all of our tribal communities and all of our tribal leaders, that they did not have a plan. On record, they said they did not have a plan. We don't have a plan. But Santa Fe New Mexico reported that they had multiple plans that they'd been sitting on. They tried to deflect, say that, oh, we didn't have any plans, but the Freedom of Information request by Santa Fe New Mexico reveals that in emails between the governor's office and PED secretary, they've acknowledged that they've had these plans and they hadn't released it, while at the same time communicating to all of us that they didn't have these plans. Now that, in and of itself, is very disingenuous, it is offensive, and we'll call it what it is. They lied. To entrust our educational futures of our children's and the well-being of our communities to an educational department and to state leadership that have knowingly misled, lied to all of us that they did not have these plans, but yet had the plans, I think is to misplace our trust. What we do instead is take back that trust and empower ourselves to hold them accountable. But in order for us to do that, we also have to see through the facade, the politics that PED is engaging in by suddenly releasing the plan and in a few days requesting a tribal educational summit with tribal leaders. Now, I love my tribal leaders. It's a pretty hard job they've got going on. But I know I've worked for tribal leaders, Deputy Chief of Staff for the Nez administration, Washington, D.C. office, the council. I've worked with tribal leaders. Some are really great tribal leaders, like the ones who are here today. But to expect tribal leaders to read a draft plan in a few days and to show up at a tribal educational summit sufficiently informed about the deficiencies in the plan, measured against the tribal plan that was put together by multiple organizations and communities, including the New Mexico Center for Law and Poverty, I think that's unrealistic. And it does not fall within New Mexico Public Education Department tribal consultation policy, nor does it fall within the state law on tribal consultation, in which timely consultation is the mandate. Now, a few days to read through these reports, to compare and contrast and find deficiencies, I don't think it's a timely process for our tribal leaders to come to that conclusion to say, this plan is deficient. Now, what's going to happen in the politics there is, and I've seen this before, the fourth floor, the governor's office, PED, will turn right around and justify the meeting that's going to take place here tomorrow to say that tribal leaders approve of the draft plan. That's how nefarious and dirty this stuff is. To counter that, I will request for the Center for Law and Poverty and our mother here, that we send a message and that we request to the governor's office and to PED that they engage in a tribal community listening session, feedback session on those plans, the draft plan, and that it should be kicked off for every of our tribal communities to receive feedback. And for them to explain why the plan is deficient measured against the tribal plans, the tribal community input sessions. That, I think, will get to the point of exposing the deficiencies, but more importantly, the intent behind why it is deficient. I'll add here that I'm a firm believer in Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. There's a section in the conversation where he talks about education as an institution, much like a bank, in which education is only accessible if you meet a certain criteria to withdraw knowledge from the schools, like you would withdraw money from a bank. In the bank analogy, it is a credit score, it is a job, it is having money. Those are the requirements to utilize a bank. The requirements to utilize an education are obviously educational proficiency standards, and there's a socioeconomic component to it as well, that children from well-off communities have a better access to an education than those of us who come from communities that are not socioeconomically well-off. The point being is that the system uses educational bureaucracy as a stop measure to preclude us, community members, from holding them accountable. And as a political part of that bureaucratic measure they employ, they race off to our tribal leaders, meet with them, with the expectation they've read this plan in 2 or 3 days, and turn around and go back into their state bureaucratic system and shout out from on high that the tribes support this plan. We have to circumvent that process. We have to have what Paulo Freire calls critical dialectics. We must speak with one another to raise the awareness in our communities and empower ourselves to challenge the system. So for the record, those are the things that I want to be said when you go back to PED, that we see the system and its injustices. On the highly offensive assumption that us indigenous people don't know better and that we won't see the political game that they're playing. We do see it. Finally, I'm going to mention this, is that educational attainment in our community is critically important. I teach students who are much more brilliant than I was when I failed out of Fort Lewis the first time and joined the Marines because then I wanted to kill my dad. And came back later to go to college and law school. I see the importance of educational attainment in circumventing all of those challenging paths that we've gone through in our lives if they have those resources. And it's just, education for children is critically important, but there are these concentric issues that play itself off of an adequate education for our children, public safety in our communities, social and economic conditions in our communities, the very simple fact of coming home with a paycheck to take care of our families. Those concentric issues that build off of educational attainment means that for us, the plan has to adequately address core issues, but also look at those concentric issues in which we benefit from in our communities when our children have good schools, have adequate resources for education. And I think that at the end of the day, can contribute to the critical dialectics utilizing their education to change the socioeconomic conditions in our communities. I think that's kind of what we're getting at here. There was the other thing I wanted to mention here is that I think that it would be really beneficial if the Tribal Educational Association, I think it's called, and the Central on Poverty and others of our tribal educational advocates also hold a educational summit for our leaders to counter the dialogue, the narrative that PED is creating. Because you'll be coming out of that meeting with one narrative, their narrative, the narrative of power, the assumption of power, measured against the narrative of the community where true power resides. And I think that might be the thing to do, is have this educational summit with tribal leaders to say, here's what they told you, here's the reality.
Milton,
Yeah,
do you mean NIEA?
yeah, everyone, see. Yeah, I think that might be the case, okay, as a strategy. And I just wanted to end again with our prayers of healing for our relatives. And I ask for blessings that you will be healed, your families will be healed, and also that justice prevails for, our administrators and leaders to do the right thing. So, but that thank you for the opportunity to communicate. My name again is Hilton Fugatsuka from Winara in college. By clan, I'm Senjukin Republic. My dad's side, they are the Tlizatlane / Kizichi clan. On my grandfather's side, my mom's grandfather's side, they are Tachini and Anastasia, Zuni. And then on my Nully side, the first Navajo clan is Hunagani, the patrollers, I guess they would call it. And so I have my relatives here as well. So blessings on all of you and your families this evening and into the next. Thank you so much.
Okay, my name is Natalie Bial, Hawasanan Shin, which is many Hogans, Kachi, Chin, which is red running into the water plant, and Hapana, are Dashanella, which is Beach Boys, and and then Patnazani, which is Dashache. My grandparents were from here, my parents were from here, I'm from here, my children are from here, they're fourth generation Topa'a, Tohis. He just mentioned a while ago about the boarding school. My parents went to boarding school. One went to Albuquerque Indian School, went on to Oklahoma, almost all over the place. That was my dad. My mom went to Ignacio, where she went to school, graduated. My dad didn't graduate. But they both experienced the boarding school life. So, as children, we were not taught Navajo. We were taught English. My dad was very sufficient in Navajo. Well, they both were, but my dad taught to my mom in Navajo. And I tried to listen, and he was, oh no, you go over there, you go do your homework or whatever, do something else. So my parents did not teach us the Navajo. We heard it every once in a while. I got Navajo from my Nala, Virginia. Her and I talked and everything, so I learned my Navajo, a lot of it from her. So the boarding school did a lot of damage to my generation. A lot of us, we know just our clans, we know just, this and that, and then we're not confident enough to teach our children. That's the way I was. I would talk to them every once in a while. I would give them different names in Navajo and stuff like that, just little things. But that was my home life. I am a former CCSD EA, an educational assistant. I was an assistant for 12 years, off and on, because in between those 12 years I had 5 children. So that, you know, you take the time off to stop working until your child goes to school, or, you know, you find a competent babysitter. That's what my kids went through. So I was with CCSD off and on for 12 years. Then I became a substitute for another 6 years. I really enjoyed my job. I thought it was just cool. My first year was in 1977, and then we were told, or we were asked, I don't remember. All I remember is that we were told to do a curriculum for the Navajo kids. And we're like, what? You know, you guys, we're not teachers, we don't have to try to teach them. But the thing that we were told to do was memorization. Tell them what red is. Tell them what a cow is. Tell them what day is Tuesday, what day is Monday. No communication. Just hand-picked words. Not putting them together to make a sentence. That's what we were told to do. And then I believe it was my 3rd or my 4th year, I decided to teach them the Pledge of Allegiance in Navajo. They had it written out already. And I read it, and I go, oh, okay. So then I thought, let me teach them this. They're memorizing it, but they're also going to learn what it means. So I told them the first words were, Kea shtatin go kahotsogi b'dahnat ai. And they go, what is all that? Is that the pledge? I said, yeah, it's Ashlatin is 50. B'chahotsogi is their boundaries.